think that bio was too long. I felt very uncomfortable during it. So thank you for coming here today. I'm going to be calling my talk Consider the Source, and I'll explain more about that in a minute. When you think of the term Native, I'm probably not the person that comes to mind. At least I'm not for myself. When I think of Native, I'm not thinking Sarah Gulish. And when I think about the definition of Native and what it means to be rooted and what it means to understand our cultural traditions and our histories and celebrate them in ways that really honor humanity, I think about this idea of sourcing and really considering the source of our work and also the work that we amplify. And this has been a big part of my work as a business owner and also as a creative. And so I'm going to be focusing on that today. It'll be a little bit storytelling because I love telling stories. I'll be sharing about my business at Flat Books and then hopefully give you some takeaways as you think about sourcing in your own work. So I want to talk about my journey as an author. It really began in 2011. And before that, I was always a kid who, wrote in journals. I loved writing songs, as I said in the opening. So I was always interested in communicating through language. But in 2011, I decided to start my PhD. I was really curious. I had been teaching as a public school teacher for 4 years, and I was finding that what I was doing in the classroom wasn't working. I was teaching teenagers, I was trying to get them excited about learning music, and there was a disconnect. And so I thought, why not research this and figure out what's going on? And so I started my PhD out of a place of curiosity, but I soon got entrenched in academia. And I learned both implicitly and explicitly that being a good academic, this is what I was taught, requires 3 things. You really have to get published at the best journals so a bunch of other academics can read it, no one else. You have to speak all the time, internationally, nationally, but you have to pay for it most of the time. And you have to get a tenure-track job at hopefully a Research One institution so people see how smart you are, right? As I was finishing my PhD and trying to get published and trying to get a job, I realized I was what they call a not-so-good academic. And this is what I did, so if you're looking to be a not-so-good academic, this really worked for me. I went back into the public school classroom. I didn't go straight on to higher ed. I tried to get my research published, except I was told that the direct quotes from the teenagers in my study were too colloquial. They were teenagers talking. I tried to speak about topics I was interested in, but in music education, a lot of people aren't interested in creativity and student autonomy and agency. They're more interested in the best way to teach band, and I just didn't fit that mold. And I didn't land that tenure-track job. I did go on some interviews, but it was very clear that I had to completely change who I was to fit into that mold. So I was a not-so-good academic. But I kept trying and trying and trying to get my work published, and finally in 2015, I got my first publishing deal for this book called Creativity in the Classroom, an innovative approach to integrate arts education. Doesn't it sound great? I thought it was a great title at the time. This was my first publishing deal, and I got my contract and was reading all the terms, and I saw that the royalty rate for publishing at an academic press would be 2%. 2% royalties, lose your intellectual property, get no advance. I thought, surely there's been an error. We're missing a zero or something. And let me say that the publishing industry is vast, and so I'm going to talk a lot about academic publishing and educational publishing. Commercial publishing is a bit different, but there's still the same issues of inequitable practices. So I called some of my friends who had done a lot of publishing, and I said, is a 2% royalty normal? They did say that if I sold 1,000 copies, it would go up to 3%, so that was really exciting. And that royalties would be paid annually, but for this specific publisher, I had to meet a certain threshold to even get my royalty payments. I've seen about $60 from this book since it was published in 2015. And everyone told me, yeah, this is really normal. This is normal to not get paid for your work. And I realized that for a lot of academics, it's about the CV and it's about the prestige. It's not actually about being fairly compensated or even getting people to access what you're doing. And I really felt like, okay, there has to be a better way to do this, right? There has to be a better way to share our life's work, to get our work out there, to get it into the hands of people. And so for me, when I consider the source of what brought me to academia in the first place, it wasn't prestige, it wasn't to get people to think I was smart, it's because I was curious. I wanted to know, how can I reach all learners in making music? That was it. And so if I was going to put my work out there and help teachers and help students, it didn't have to be through the traditional model. So this is the source of what I did, and this is why it mattered to me. I want to talk a little bit about freezer meals, which I know seems like it has nothing to do with this talk, but bear with me. So after my first book came out, I started doing more publishing. I got chapters in books from Oxford and Bloomsbury and Routledge, like they read in the beginning. All the companies were kind of the same, right? The same model of publishing, the same losing your intellectual property, giving over your rights, not getting paid very much. And I was on a sabbatical from teaching in the fall of 2018 to write my next book and find a good publisher to publish it. It was also a pretty difficult time in my life in general. I had just had my third kid, so I had 3 kids 4 and under. Our father-in-law was in hospice for 2 months, and we relocated to care for him. And then I was supposed to come back to Philadelphia, find a way to write this book while being a mom and a wife and all the things, and I just felt like freezer meals were the answer. You know, if I could just really perfect my freezer meal game, everything would be fine. And so I just did a deep dive into the best freezer meal prep, and I am deeply into Googling freezer meals when I listen to a podcast from one of the freezer meal influencers, because that is a thing. And I'm listening to this podcast, and she's talking about ebooks, and she's talking about how ebooks have changed her, her business for the better, and she talks about the flexibility and the innovation, and I just thought, yes, I need to put out my curriculum just as an ebook that anyone could access. But then I started thinking, my audience is only so big, so what if I created a platform and I got other people to put out their books with me, and we could benefit from each other's audiences, kind of like indie labels, did in the early days, where different bands would get together and use each other's audiences to really amplify their work. So I told my brother about this idea, because he had built some websites, and he said, yeah, I think that's a good idea, let's build it together. And everyone in our family is like, this is a terrible idea, you and your brother hate each other. And I was like, it's gonna be fine, it's gonna be great. Fast forward, ebooks did heal our relationship, so, if you're in a similar situation with your siblings, I can't recommend it enough. But David said he would help me build this platform. He said we should call it F-Flat Books. If you are a music nerd, you'll know that there is no note F-flat. F-flat is actually E, so it means ebooks. So we really tried to tap into do we get it? Some of us got it? I still have authors who will text me who have been published with me for 3 years, and they'll go, I was today years old when I realized what the company's name meant. So when we launched our website, summer of 2019, we had 4 books. I spent a year asking every academic I knew to write a book for me. Most of them were like, cool. No, thank you. But 3 said yes. And so I was able to launch with 4 books. And from the first day on our website, we had these words. We wanted to be equitable. We wanted to be innovative in our approaches. We wanted to be accessible for educators. This was the first book that I published with F-Flat Books, and this was the model that we set up. We said all of our authors are going to retain their intellectual property. They can sell it other places, they can take it off our platform, they can send it to another publisher. We don't care, it's yours, you do what you want with it. We wanted our books to be interactive, so we really wanted to think about how educators could use these online resources. We started with a 70% royalty. Today our authors get between 50 and 70%. We paid our authors on a bi-weekly basis so they could treat it like a job. They could treat it like something that could actually bring an income for their families. And we decided to leverage community to really market our work. So when I think back to what mattered in 2019 and what was the source of our work, I talk about equity, but it wasn't just equity in how we paid people. That was the start of it. But I also wanted to feel like anyone could see themselves on our platform. So most music education publishing is largely male, largely white. And I wanted to create a space where anyone could feel like they could be part of our community. They didn't have to have letters after their name. They didn't have to have credentials that most publishing houses required. They could be people just doing really cool stuff for kids, and we would be able to highlight them. So from day one, we decided to make our author page a page where you could actually see all of our authors. So anyone coming to our site could see who we're representing, what type of stories that we're telling. This is our author page today. It wasn't our author page when we first started. And I think the beautiful thing about this is you can see so many different types of people represented, but we also see gaps. We also see where we're missing the mark. We also see which stories and which songs and which resources we still aren't sharing and where we need to do more work. Another thing that we decided to do in thinking about sourcing is, again, break down barriers for how people are traditionally published, right? In a traditional publishing house, you put forth, maybe a chapter of your book. You have to do a lot in terms of writing, and we know that some of our authors who have great ideas might need help writing, right? And so instead of just sourcing in the traditional way, we decided to find people who are doing cool things and try to source that way. So I did a lot of sourcing on Instagram. I don't know if you know about Teachergram, but it is crazy. There are a lot of teachers who are posting a lot of things. And so I got to know some people in music education who are doing really cool stuff and tried to get them to share their work with us. So one day I got this message, this is in the summer of 2020, from an author whose name was Franklin Willis. And he, as you can see, said, "Hey, I'm working on a children's book. It's actually done. I have to figure out how to market and sell it." I asked him physical or ebook. Ebook with an audio file for teachers and parents. Eventually I want to do a physical copy. I said we should talk. He sent me this book, and up to this point, we didn't have children's books on our site, but again, we didn't have many books at all. We had only been a company for about 9 months. And I said, "Send me what you're doing." He sent me the story. It was called Edward's Rhythm Sticks. It was about his son. He was encouraged to write it after the murder of George Floyd because he wanted to create a book that would last forever, that showed his son that his life was precious and his life mattered. He also wanted to share that music is everywhere. And so the cool thing about this book is he had visuals, but he also had music and he had narration. And it was more than just reading a story, it was knowing Franklin and knowing Edward, his son. And so my brother said, let's make this an interactive flip book where people can hear Franklin's voice, they can hear the music, they can see Edward, they can see the story. So we launched it in August of 2020, and the book did really well with zero marketing efforts, and I mean zero paid marketing efforts. Franklin has gotten tens of thousands of dollars of royalties from this book, from a $15 ebook. He was a public school music teacher, and I'm sure everyone knows in this room, teachers are not well paid. I've had teachers who have published through us who have paid off their student loans through royalties they've made through ebooks. And for me, as a former public school educator, I see how powerful that can be. So you can see Franklin and his launch party graphic that I had to dig up. That's him with his son Edward, holding Edward's rhythm sticks. And when I thought about why this book was so successful, it wasn't just that Franklin's a great writer, which he is, or that he's an engaging presenter. I think it was the fact, too, that people connected with the person behind the work, right? And when you think about a lot of educational resources, songs are used and sold while people behind the cultural artifacts are invisible. Here's what I mean by that. A lot of the educator-facing publishing companies will say that things are by a staff writer, but we don't actually know who's writing it. Or we'll take a song, like we'll take a song from Latin America and we'll republish it, but the people who are behind that music are never visible, and they're not credited, and they're definitely not compensated. So how can we make people more visible? How can we connect children to not only new music and new ways of learning, but really how can we connect them to the people and the cultures that make that music possible? So we've tried to do this in a few different ways. The first thing we did is we established a visionary board in 2021 of a lot of people who don't look like me, who have very different experiences, some who have different philosophies than me, and will be very vocal in telling me when I'm making mistakes or doing things wrong. But we wanted to have a variety of folks who were reviewing submissions. So when we chose what we published, it wasn't just things I thought was important, but it was really folks who had experience in all different areas of music education. We decided that we needed to create more resources that were bilingual and rooted in communities, and I'll show some of those in a minute. I've also made a lot of mistakes, and I have to put that up there because I think sometimes doing a business where you're trying to do equitable practices, you have to make decisions that are bold, and sometimes you get it right, and sometimes you don't. But it's okay if you have a good community who will support you and help you learn from those mistakes. And then finally, one of my board members says that she loves we practice radical transparency. It's probably because I'm an oversharer by nature, and so I've taken that into my business. But when it comes to our financials, when it comes to our contracts, we're very transparent, which a lot of publishing companies aren't. Many won't even let you share your royalty rate in your contract. So we want to be clear about what our authors are getting, who we're supporting, and how we're promoting them. So some of the stories that we've been able to share because of this initiative, to share more songs and stories that are incorporated, include Kamu Kamu. This is by Michelle McCulley, who is a member of the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe. She used this story and this song as a way to preserve her Northern Paiute language, which had been suppressed because of boarding schools. And for her, publishing this through us, she said she had been asked to publish many times, but never signed an agreement because as a Native American woman, she didn't ever want to sign her rights away. And so finding a publishing company that says, you get to keep your rights and you can do whatever you want with this book was a game changer for her. Or the Vietnamese children's songbook by Dr. Tina Nguyen, who had taken this to many companies, and they said, well, there is no market for Vietnamese children's songbooks because there's never been one published, right? And so no one would publish it, and we did, and it's been doing really well because people want this. Right? Or from across the street where we learn about Palos music of the Dominican Republic. It's a cultural tradition that is not usually taught because it's one of the people, it's folk music. And so we were able to create a book where not only the illustrator came from the Dominican Republic, but also the songwriter, the author, and the narrators all had the same cultural buy-in. We're able to put out books like We Are Golden that talks about racism in the music classroom and how we can combat Asian hate through reclaiming our identities and using affirmations. We've been able to put out books like Where Are All the Instruments from an international author who wanted to show that representation could look different than what we think of when we think of the traditional orchestra. We've even put out books that connect STEM and Jamaican music. I mean, sky's the limit when you're doing this sort of work. And if you look at our website today, I actually counted for this talk, we have over 130 resources that look as varied as the authors who create them. Because again, the focus is on people and people sharing their work, not on making everything standardized or look the same, as we see at a lot of different publishing houses. So in closing, as I thought about how to wrap this up, I wish I could have, 5 easy steps to conscientious sourcing of people and products. I'm living this right now. This is my first year not teaching full-time. I took the leap to leave my classroom, which was really hard, to try to grow this platform. And I would love to say that it's easy to find ways to grow a company sustainably while you're giving away so much. But it's hard, and so it's work that I'm committed to, but it's work that I'm actively figuring out as I go. I also wish I could give you, the freezer meal ebook that would change your life forever, but it didn't really work out for me. If you want to talk about the website, though, that I love, we can talk after this. But what I will tell you is just a few questions that I ask myself when it comes to considering the source that hopefully can help you as you're thinking of how you source your creative work and also amplify other creatives in your midst. What is my motivation for doing this? Is it self-serving, community-serving, vision-serving? This is a hard one for me because we have such a diverse authorship. If something happens internationally or, if something affects one of our community members, I feel that knee-jerk reaction to have to say something, right? Or have to post something or have to do something. And being able to take a step back and remember, why am I doing this? Is it community serving or is it self-serving because I want to look like a good person who's at the helm of this? These are really important questions to ask. And usually the answer is people, right? So when the war erupted between Israel and Palestine, some of our teachers are over there in both spaces. And so the reaction was, let's not think of what to say, let's find the people and find ways to support them. And through that, we're putting out resources and songs and stories from a conservatory over in Palestine who lost one of their sites because of bombing, and then also some of our teachers in Israel who are sharing their songs and stories. So anytime I get bogged down with me, I try to find the people that I need to be promoting. What is the history behind the art, or you can fill in the blank, whatever it is for you, that I'm engaging with, and am I making people visible? If we're putting out a resource on any type of music, where do we really find that rooted? And are people the ones celebrated in it? Or are we just using those songs and stories to elevate ourselves and our platform? And then finally, direction. Where am I headed? Is that direction aligned with the source? When I talked about getting caught in academia and thinking suddenly I had to be this impressive person, coming back to this idea of, no, I'm just a curious person. And that's what led me here. And curiosity needs to keep leading me to the next place. That's all I have. Thank you.
Awesome.